There's a person in every room like this. They're the one who notices the second before anyone else does. The friend who goes quiet mid-conversation because they caught a flicker in your voice. The employee who can feel a layoff coming weeks before the meeting gets scheduled. The partner who knows something is wrong before you've said a single word. Because your breathing changed, or you didn't laugh at the right moment, or you used a formal word you never use. You might be that person, or you might love one. They read rooms like weather systems. They catch tone shifts, posture changes, the half-second pause before someone answers a question they didn't want asked. Most people call this a gift, a superpower. You're just so perceptive, they say, like it's a compliment with no cost attached. But here's the twist, and it's the whole reason we're doing this video. This isn't a gift. It's a nervous system working overtime, and it usually comes from somewhere. Somewhere the person didn't choose. What looks like emotional intelligence from the outside can feel, from the inside, like never being able to turn your brain off. Like being fluent in everyone else's feelings and a stranger to your own. Today, we're going to decode the psychology of people who are too aware. Where this trait actually comes from. The signs that give it away, even in people who've learned to hide it well. What it costs them, quietly, over years. And this matters. How to take a trait that's been running them and turn it into something they run instead. If any of this sounds familiar, stay. This one's for you. Sheer IT comes from. Let's start with the science, because this isn't just a personality quirk. It's built. Some of it is wiring you're born with. Psychologist Elaine Aron spent decades researching what she called sensory processing sensitivity, a trait where the nervous system takes in more information from the environment and processes it more deeply than average. People with this trait aren't imagining things. Their brains genuinely register more. A shift in someone's tone, a change in lighting, an unspoken tension in a room. It's not mystical. It's just a dial turned up higher than most people's. Then there's the environment, and this is where it gets heavier. A lot of hyper-awareness isn't inherited. It's trained. Children who grow up in unpredictable homes, where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where love came with conditions, where silence in the house meant something bad was coming, often develop what psychologists call hypervigilance. That's a state of constant alertness, where the brain stays on watch for danger even when danger isn't actually present anymore. Here's the mechanism. Deep in the brain sits the amygdala. Think of it as the body's smoke detector. Its job is to scan for threat and sound the alarm. In a child who grew up needing to predict a parent's next mood, that smoke detector gets calibrated to go off at the faintest hint of smoke. Even years later, even in safe rooms, even with safe people. Neuroscientist and researcher Bruce Perry, who has spent his career studying childhood and the developing brain, has described this exact pattern. A nervous system that adapted to a dangerous environment and never got the memo that the danger is over. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, and putting the brakes on emotional reactions, is supposed to work in partnership with the amygdala. It's supposed to say, alarm received. Let's check if this is actually a fire. But in someone who grew up scanning for danger, that partnership gets lopsided. The alarm system gets louder. The calming system doesn't always catch up. One more piece worth naming. Theory of mind. That's the ability to understand that other people have thoughts, feelings, and intentions different from your own, and to guess what those might be. Most people develop a working version of this by early childhood, but children who had to monitor a caregiver's emotional state just to feel safe often develop an exaggerated version of it. They don't just understand that you have feelings. They track them constantly, automatically, without being asked. So what you end up with is a person whose brain learned, early and thoroughly, that awareness equals survival. And that lesson doesn't switch off just because the environment finally became safe. Here's how it shows up. Not as a personality trait people brag about at dinner parties. As small, quiet patterns most people around them never even clock. They finish your sentence in their head before you say it, and they're usually right. Picture a team meeting. Someone's boss says, "Let's circle back to this next week," in a tone that's just slightly too smooth. Everyone else nods and moves on. The hyper-aware person in the room already knows the project is getting cut. Not because they were told, because the tone didn't match the words. This connects back to that amygdala-driven pattern scanning we just talked about. Their brain has spent years cross-referencing tone, timing, and body language against outcomes, building an internal database most people never bother building. It's not psychic. It's pattern recognition running on years of practice. The quotable truth here: they're not guessing your feelings, they're translating them. Because somewhere along the way, understanding you became the price of feeling safe. They apologize for things that aren't their fault. A friend cancels plans last minute. The hyper-aware person, who did absolutely nothing wrong, says, "I'm sorry. Was it something I said?" Their friend blinks, confused, because it clearly wasn't. This ties to something psychologists call an external locus of control developed specifically around emotional responsibility. A learned habit of assuming that other people's moods are somehow theirs to manage or explain. In childhood, this made sense. If a parent's mood shifted, the safest bet was to assume responsibility and try to fix it. That habit doesn't always know it's outdated. They were taught early that other people's feelings were their job. Nobody ever told them they could resign. They can sense when someone is lying. Even a small, harmless lie, almost instantly. A coworker says, "No, totally. I'm fine with the deadline," while tapping their pen just a little too fast. Everyone else takes the words at face value. The hyper-aware person clocks the mismatch immediately and quietly adjusts their whole approach to the conversation. This is related to something researchers call incongruence detection, noticing when verbal content and nonverbal signals don't line up. Psychologist Paul Ekman spent much of his career studying these micro-expressions, the flickers of true emotion that cross a face in a fraction of a second before the polite mask goes back up. Most people miss them entirely. Someone who grew up needing to detect danger fast learned to catch them without even trying. Truth doesn't need to be spoken for them to hear it. That's exactly the problem. They over-explain simple decisions. They order coffee and then immediately say, "Sorry, I know that's a weird order. I don't know. I like it a little sweet. Is that okay?" Nobody asked. Nobody cared. But some part of them is bracing for judgment that isn't coming. This connects to something close to what psychologists describe as anticipatory anxiety. A learned expectation that any small choice might trigger disapproval, built from an environment where disapproval once arrived unpredictably. The brain doesn't wait to find out if this room is safe. It assumes it isn't and prepares a defense in advance. They're not explaining the coffee. They're pre-defending themselves against a version of you that used to exist somewhere else, a long time ago. They remember exactly how someone made them feel, even years later, even if the person barely remembers the interaction at all. A high school teacher who once rolled their eyes at a wrong answer. A relative who made one offhand comment about their weight at a family dinner a decade ago. The moment is small to everyone else. To them, it's filed away permanently. This is emotional encoding. The well-documented tendency for the brain to store memories more vividly when they were experienced under emotional intensity. For someone whose nervous system runs hot on alert, ordinary moments can get flagged as significant, and significant moments get burned in for good. They don't hold grudges. They hold data. And their body never deleted the file. They can walk into a room and immediately know who's upset with whom. At a family gathering, within 30 seconds, they've clocked that two relatives aren't speaking, that someone's forced smile is covering irritation, and that the tension has something to do with a conversation that happened before they even arrived. Nobody said a word about it. This draws on that heightened theory of mind we mentioned earlier, but paired with years of practiced social pattern matching. Psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen's research on theory of mind describes it as the mental capacity to model what's going on inside someone else's head. In hyper-aware people, that capacity isn't just present, it's constantly running in the background, uninvited, like a browser tab that never closes. They didn't ask to know this. It just arrives, whether they want it or not. They struggle to accept compliments, but they can spot flattery from a mile away. Tell them, "You did a great job," and they'll deflect. "Oh, it was nothing, really." But if someone's praise is even slightly performative or self-serving, they feel it instantly, and something in them recoils. This connects to cognitive dissonance. the discomfort that arises when new information conflicts with an existing internal belief. If someone's internal self-concept was shaped by criticism, sincere praise doesn't fit the model. It creates friction rather than comfort. Meanwhile, insincere praise gets flagged fast because they've had years of practice detecting mismatched signals. See sign 3. Compliments bounce off them, but criticism sinks in and stays. That's not modesty. That's an old wound with excellent instincts. They need significant time alone after socializing, even when they enjoyed themselves. They'll go to a great party, laugh all night, genuinely have fun, and then need the entire next day in near silence to recover. Friends sometimes take this personally, as if the person didn't actually enjoy their company. This is straightforward from a nervous system standpoint. Constant environmental scanning, tracking tone, expression, subtext, mood shifts across a whole room, is metabolically expensive. Researcher Elaine Aron's work on sensory processing sensitivity specifically notes that highly sensitive individuals need more recovery time after high stimulation environments, not because they dislike the stimulation, but because processing it that deeply simply costs more energy. Their nervous system doesn't just attend the party, it works the party, and afterward, it needs to clock out. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. This trait, left unmanaged, is exhausting to live inside. Think about a wedding. Everyone else in the room is dancing, laughing, present. The hyper-aware person is doing that too. But underneath it, they're also tracking the bride's mother, who seems tense near the gift table. They're noticing the groomsman who hasn't smiled once. They're aware that the best man's toast landed a little flat, and they're quietly worried about how he must feel walking back to his seat. Nobody asked them to monitor any of this. They just can't stop. By the end of the night, they're not tired from dancing. They're tired from everyone else's evening, which they carried alongside their own. Or think about friendship. A hyper-aware person often becomes the one everyone confides in. The reliable, perceptive friend who always seems to know exactly what to say. But reciprocity rarely balances out. People bring their pain to the perceptive friend because it's easy. The perceptive friend already understands without being asked to explain. What gets lost is the return trip. The moments where someone asks, unprompted, "But how are you actually doing?" Over years, this creates a specific, quiet kind of loneliness, being deeply known for your usefulness and barely known for yourself. Or picture the workplace. A hyper-aware employee senses restructuring is coming long before it's announced. They also sense which colleague is quietly struggling, which manager is under pressure from above, which meeting is really about something unspoken. They carry all of it, unpaid, unrequested, while trying to do their actual job. When the layoffs finally happen, they're not shocked. They're just tired. Tired in the specific way that comes from having braced for something for months while everyone else got the news in a single afternoon. This is the real cost, not weakness. Depletion. A system that never learned it was allowed to stand down. Here's the good news, and it's real. Awareness like this can be trained toward peace instead of toward exhaustion. It takes a few shifts in how the trait gets handled, not the trait itself. Not every signal requires a response. Think of a smoke detector in a kitchen. A good one should go off if there's an actual fire. A poorly calibrated one goes off every time you make toast. The goal isn't to rip the smoke detector off the wall. You still need it. The goal is recalibration, learning to ask, before reacting, is this an actual fire or is this toast? Practically, that means pausing before acting on every perceived tension, noticing the alarm and then checking it against evidence rather than obeying it automatically. This is close to what's often called cognitive reappraisal in psychological research, deliberately reassessing an automatic emotional reaction before letting it drive behavior. Other people's feelings are information, not assignments. Picture a lighthouse. A lighthouse's job is to show a light so ships can see the rocks. It is not the lighthouse's job to steer every ship in the harbor. A hyper-aware person can notice someone else's mood. That's the light doing its job, without taking responsibility for fixing it. Noticing is not the same as owning. Practically, when you sense someone's upset, you're allowed to ask, "Do you want to talk about it? Or would you rather I just sit with you?" Instead of silently absorbing the job of repairing their mood for them. Recovery isn't optional. It's maintenance. Think of a phone battery. Nobody accuses a phone of being broken because it needs to charge. High output systems require recharging. That's not a flaw, that's physics. Someone whose nervous system runs on high alert all day is doing more processing than most people around them, whether anyone notices or not. Protecting quiet time after high stimulation environments isn't antisocial. It's maintenance for a system that works harder than most. None of this means suppressing the awareness. It means learning to hold the steering wheel instead of being dragged behind the car. And if any part of this described you, if you recognized yourself in the over-explaining, the exhaustion after parties, the years-old memory that still stings, here's the thing worth hearing clearly. You are not broken. You built a finely tuned instrument out of circumstances you didn't choose. Left unmanaged, that instrument can run you ragged. But once you learn where the volume knob is, the same trait that once kept you scanning for danger can become something else entirely. It can become wisdom, the kind of quiet, grounded understanding of people that can't be taught, only earned. If this described someone you know, or if it described you, tell us in the comments which sign hit closest to home. Sometimes just naming it out loud is the first step toward carrying it differently. If this was useful, consider liking the video and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Chances are, you already know exactly who that is. And if you're the person who noticed everything in that room tonight, carrying all of it quietly, the way you always do, take a breath. You've earned a night off from watching. We'll see you in the next one.